Hey, what's going on, guys? So, the first trailer for James Gunn's Superman dropped a few days ago, and I did not want to talk about it. And I still kind of don't, because everyone is so happy. Well, almost everyone. Like, the last time humanity came together like this was when Osama bin Laden died. The great Satan of Zack Snyder has been slain. The beast of Injustice Murder Man is no longer. We finally have a hopeful, happy, smiling Superman full of hope and optimism and smiles and bright colors. And I wish that I could join you guys in the sun. I want to so badly. But this movie has been a weird roller coaster for me. Because I really like James Gunn. I really like Guardians 3, and retroactively it made me appreciate the first two movies a lot more. I love The Suicide Squad. It's probably the closest I think anyone's ever gotten to capturing the comic book reading experience in live action. And Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed is the fucking cat's pajamas. So I was really excited when James Gunn announced that he himself would be the writer and director of the new Superman movie. So I've been fully expecting to be on this movie's dick like foreskin, but for whatever reason, everything about this movie has been 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Like, out of context, every individual detail about this movie looks and sounds really cool, but when put together in context with one another, it doesn't not work, but it doesn't hit like I was expecting it to. And when I saw the trailer, all I could think was, I was expecting a James Gunn Superman movie, and this looks like Superman written by YouTube video essayist, directed by Reddit, with costume and character designs by Midjourney. Or at the very least, the trailer does.
Move this man!
But my, I'm sure, unpopular opinion aside, it's pretty cool seeing people actually talk about Superman again. That said, whenever there is Superman discourse, and I'm seeing a lot more of it now because Superman's gaining some popularity again, you always see people arguing over Superman's politics. Is he liberal? Is he conservative? Is he beyond politics? Which is fucking stupid. Like, you can't champion the American way, yet claim to be apolitical. Like, that's like being aggressively pro-porn while also being repulsed by sex. It doesn't make sense, but I digress. But you'll often see, in response to claims of Superman being a figure of conservative American nationalism, people clapping back with pages from early issues of Action Comics which depict Superman as a champion of the oppressed, and articles about how Superman was created by 2 Jewish guys in the 1930s as a socialist power fantasy. Which is true. This is what Superman was initially conceived as. Be that as it may, the character has evolved a lot since then, and whenever those Golden Age elements are roped back into the character beyond just superficially and aesthetically, they are almost always met with rejection. Superman doesn't bully CEO billionaires into giving employees livable wages. Superman doesn't laugh at neo-Nazis. Superman doesn't drop domestic abusers in the middle of the Arctic and force them to walk to shelter. Superman doesn't get into street fights with the police who are attacking peaceful protesters. That's just being try-hard and edgy for the sake of being edgy. Superman is a good, humble, good, earnest farm boy who smiles, and he's good, and he saves cats from trees, and he waves the American flag, and he doesn't get involved in real-world problems, because even though he looks human, he's not human, so he can only handle the fantastical stuff, like aliens and giant robots, because he's a star man, and he's waiting in the sky, and he'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. Which is also true. And this brings to light the inherent problem with Superman. And it's that he will forever be torn between what he was originally envisioned as and what popularized him as an icon of the 20th century. Those two things being mutually exclusive. Because here's the thing that I think people who champion the whole Superman as an SJW, like, here's what I think they're missing. The reason why Superman evolved out of that champion of the oppressed power fantasy is because the Great Depression ended. Superman is a product of the Great Depression. In a time where the ultra-wealthy were finessing New Deal-era policies to make themselves richer while everyone else economically ate shit, Superman was created as a power fantasy to spite the wealthy. But then the Great Depression came to an end, so in order to maintain any sense of relevancy, Superman stories shifted gears and started focusing on other elements of the character's mythology, like his romance with Lois Lane, the history of Krypton, the crazy powers, and I've already given this history lesson in like several other Superman videos, so if you want to check those out, be my guest. But for the later part of the 1940s, into the 1950s, and into the 1960s, Superman stories had gotten well away from the socialist power fantasy and were high-concept sci-fi romance comics. Now, that said, the comics do start to find their political voice again by the time you get to the 1970s, but by then, in the words of Jack Kirby himself, Superman had transformed into an allegory for the white man's burden. So any political commentary with the character at that point would be focused through that lens, with Superman being a stranger in a strange land with these lesser than unevolved ignorant humans. And that's how you end up with stories like Superman 247, where Superman comes across a migrant plantation where these literal slaves ask for his help, and he's basically like, but if I help you, then I have to help everyone, and that's not fair, is it?
I beg your pardon? I beg your pardon?
What? Okay. This sounds so much worse than it actually is.
Now, this was the era when Superman really flourished. This was when he was the most popular character in American fiction, and it's this material that Richard Donner was really pulling from that led to his Superman films. And you really can't ignore the impact that those movies had on the character. In fact, I would argue that Superman's comic book mythology took a hard backseat to the Christopher Reeve films moving forward, to the point where, even right now, I think, Superman's comic book origin is basically just the first two Christopher Reeve movies. That's more or less the purpose of Geoff Johns and Gary Frank's Secret Origin, which again, I think post-Doomsday Clock is supposed to be the canonical origin of the character once again. But also, a lot of elements from those movies have been cemented into the character's mythology, like Lois Lane not being able to spell, the Fortress of Solitude being a giant crystal palace, the Superman symbol being the family crest of the House of El, Smallville being located in Kansas. Originally I think it was in Maryland or something like that. So a lot of Superman's pop culture mythology is directly tied to the Christopher Reeve movies, which is sort of fascinating considering Superman's character arc over the course of those first two films, coming to grips with the fact that even though he looks human and lives among humans, he isn't human. Thus, he's forbidden from interfering in human affairs. Granted, like I said earlier, the comics were already playing with that idea, but holy Jesus if this movie didn't set that in stone. And this really cemented Superman as like the ultimate firefighter, but on a cosmic scale. He deals with the world-ending threats, and he'll put out fires, and he'll catch us when we fall, but he will only act in a reactionary manner, because that's the role of a firefighter, to react to the world's problems, not to proactively go about changing the world's problems, which is directly counter to the character's creation. But that's been the framework of the character's mythology for nearly 50 years at this point, and over the decades, those foundations have only been reinforced. So no, Superman is not a champion of the oppressed. Not anymore. Because the character's mythology just doesn't allow for it. Golden Age Superman was one part John Carter, one part Luigi Mangione. Which at this point that joke is incredibly dated due to recent events, but you get what I'm saying. And as cool as I think that is personally, it does lock him into sticking up for particular groups of people around the world, and that's the thing with Superman, or much rather, the pop icon iteration of Superman. He can't just belong to the oppressed. He has to belong to everyone. he has to be a symbol of all things good to everybody. But good is culturally and ideologically relative. So in order to be a symbol of positivity for everybody, he can't really stand for anything in particular. That way, everyone can see themselves in Superman. And I do mean everyone.
Why you booing me? I'm right.
And like I said, whenever people try to bring Superman back to that status quo and write him as he was originally envisioned by his creators, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, people are not with it, and those stories are quickly swept under the rug, because it's just not what the public widely recognizes as Superman. Which is a shame, because I think that aspect of the character is really cool, and honestly, significantly more relevant now than ever before. Granted, I have seen more people giving props to Grant Morrison and Rags Morales' New 52 Action Comics run in recent years, so that's pretty cool. You know, better late than never, I guess. I also still really like how in Earth 1, J. Michael Straczynski and Shane Davis reintegrated a lot of Golden Age Superman sensibilities into a Superman with a more traditional pop culture mythology. I thought that made for some really interesting character work and deconstruction. And you know what? At its core, My Adventures with Superman is the Superman versus the military-industrial complex TV show that I've been longing for. I mean, it's buried under 900 pounds of ooh-woo soft boy marshmallow fluff, which is undoubtedly there as, like, an apologetic overcompensation for 10 years worth of dark and gritty Superman stories. But at its core, you know, it's very Golden Age inspired, and I think that's really cool. But yeah, by and large, Superman isn't really a champion of the oppressed kind of character anymore, and he hasn't been in over 80 years. Specifically, mainstream default Superman. And you can argue against that if you want, but it's kind of like when people say, Batman is supposed to be dark and edgy, and he's a loner. Like, yeah, 80 years ago when he was first created. It's not like immediately afterwards he got himself a kid sidekick and a showgirl's outfit and 90% of the character's mythology unironically looks like Batman Forever. Like, it's the same sort of issue that I have just with Superman, except it's in reverse, because everybody always wants to take Batman back to his Golden Age roots. But you rarely ever see that same level of appreciation for Supermans. Instead, the Superman equivalent is almost always, we're taking the character back to Christopher Reeve. That's classic Superman. That's the blueprint. Which, you know, isn't a bad thing necessarily. It just sort of is what it is. However, like I mentioned previously, My Adventures with Superman thematically harkens back to the Golden Age really hard. And so is Absolute Superman by Jason Aaron and Raphael Sandoval, which I honestly wasn't all that impressed by, but I do want to give that book a proper chance to find its footing before passing judgment. And look, if anything, assuming humanity doesn't tear itself apart with another world war, Superman goes public domain in less than 10 years. So if you really do want to see more authentic, true to form, champion of the oppressed Superman stories, start the clock. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Superman as a champion of the oppressed. And those are also my thoughts on the first trailer for James Gunn's Superman, for like the 8 people asking my opinion on it. There you go. But what about you? What are your thoughts on either the trailer or Superman as a socialist champion of the oppressed? Let me know down below in the comments section, and if you want to see more videos like this, all you gotta do is subscribe. I'm the Mystical Green Beanie. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.
Common interest.